I laid my mother to rest 3 weeks ago. Tonight, I just finished digging the grave for my own identity. You think that sounds dramatic? Stick around. It is currently 2014 a.m., and I am sitting on the floor of the master closet at the McLean estate. The silence in this house is aggressive. It presses against your eardrums. The air still smells like shalimar and expensive dust, and it is making me physically nauseous. The estate sale is tomorrow. The auction house people arrive at 9 sharp to cart away 40 years of accumulated opulence. I was supposed to be finalizing the inventory. Instead, I found something that doesn't align with the facts. There was this massive heavy oil painting of my father hanging above the vanity. I've always hated it. The eyes followed you, judging your net worth. I decided to take it down myself because I needed the physical exertion. I needed to break something. I grabbed the frame, heavy guilt digging into my palms, and I yanked. It came away from the wall with a sickening crack. My hand slipped, hitting the edge of the marble countertop, and I felt that sharp sting right here, at my hairline. That's the scar. The one mother told me came from falling off the slide at the playground when I was 3. She used to touch it and say, "You were such a clumsy child, Zora, always falling." But rubbing it now, looking at the fresh blood on my skin, I realized something. That scar is too precise. It's a straight line. You don't get straight lines falling off a slide. Behind the canvas, the drywall was cut out, a perfect square, and there it was, a wall safe. Embedded, hidden, I didn't know it was there. I've lived in this house for 46 years, and I never knew it was there. I grabbed a brass letter opener from the desk. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it. I tried the birthdays, the anniversaries, nothing. Then I tried the code to the trust fund. The click was soft, submissive. The door swung open and the smell hit me old paper, dry rot, and secrets. Inside was a stack of manila folders, and lying loosely on top, a Polaroid. I picked it up. The timestamp said 1982. It was a toddler in a white christening gown. I have that gown. It's in a vacuum seal bag in the attic, silk yellowing with age. I thought it was me, but then I looked closer. The child in the photo has a port wine stain. A deep, violent splash of red across her left cheek. I don't have a birthmark. I never have. Standing there, looking at that stranger's face, I flashed back to 1984. The garden. Sunlight filtering through the willow trees, everything hazy and golden. I was learning to walk. I remember the grip of the hand-manicured, perfect red nails holding me up so tight it almost hurt. Don't let go, I thought, but I don't remember love. I just remember the grip. I came back to the present, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at the documents underneath the photo. I pulled the first document out, and the signature at the bottom made my blood run cold. It wasn't my mother's handwriting. It was a payment receipt for a child. I was staring at the payment receipt, but my eyes weren't focusing. The thermal paper was crinkled, soft like old skin, and the ink was starting to fade into a gray blur. I kept reading it over and over, trying to force the numbers to make sense in a legal context. But there is no legal context for buying a child. I felt a throb above my left eye, sharp and insistent. I reached up and my hand came away, sticky with blood. I must have slammed my head against the mahogany shelf when I yanked the safe door open. The blood was warm, dripping onto my silk blouse, a dark red stain blooming right over my heart. I didn't wipe it away. I needed the pain. It was the only thing anchoring me to the floor. Let's look at the evidence, I told myself. Just look at the facts. I grabbed the remaining manila folders from the safe. There were 2 of them, heavy with paper, bound by rubber bands that snapped when I pulled them off. The smell hit me, then cedar dust, old ink, and something else. Something faintly sweet like burnt sugar. The first folder was marked medical. I didn't open it. Not yet. I was afraid of what the diagnosis would be. I went for the second one. It was stamped confidential in bright red letters that had started to bleed into the paper. I flipped it open, and my entire life, it just stopped. It was a death certificate. Department of Vital Statistics. I read the name at the top. Zora Okonkwo. That's my name. I am Zora Okonkwo. But the date of death listed on the certificate was November 14, 1982. I did the math instantly. I was born in May 1978. That would make me 4 years old. 4 years old. The certificate listed the cause of death as smoke inhalation and thermal injury. It said the body was identified at a morgue in Richmond. Richmond? That doesn't align with the facts. My parents told me I fell off a swing set in McLean when I was 4. They told me I hit my head, that I needed surgery to stop the bleeding in my brain. That was the story behind the scar on my hairline. A playground accident. But this document says fire. It says my mother, Evelyn Okonkwo, identified the body. Her signature was right there on the bottom line. Informant. She identified a dead, burned child as me. And then, 1 month later, she pays a stranger $15,000 for a replacement. I looked at the receipt again. December 1982. The timeline is perfect. It's a closed loop. The real Zora Okonkwo died in a fire, and I was purchased to fill the empty space in the nursery. I stood up, but the room was tilting violently to the left. The blood from my head wound was running down my cheek. Dripping onto the death certificate, I walked over to the vanity mirror against the wall. Gripping the edge of the table, I looked at my reflection. The woman staring back had a straight surgical scar hidden under her hair. A woman who spent 46 years building a life on a foundation of ash. If I died in 1982, then who is the woman looking back at me in this mirror? I can feel the blood. It's a warm, steady trickle winding its way down my temple, past my ear and dripping onto the collar of my silk blouse. I should go to the bathroom. I'm dizzy. The room is tilting slightly to the left, but I can't look away from what's sitting on the mahogany shelf in front of me. Beneath the death certificate of the original Zora Okonkwo, there's a thick stack of papers clipped together with a rusted fastener. The top document is labeled Application for Delayed Registration of Birth. I'm a litigator. I forge through paperwork for a living. I know what a legitimate Commonwealth of Virginia filing looks like. And this is an insultingly bad forgery. The seal is slightly off-center. A cheap embosser used by a secretary in a hurry, not a state clerk. The typewriter ribbon is fading on the capital letters. But let's look at the evidence, shall we? The filing date is November 17th, 1982. That is 3 days. 3 days after the original Zora died in that fire in Richmond. Do you have any idea how long a real adoption takes? Months, years, home visits, background checks, waiting periods. You don't just lose a child on a Tuesday and file paperwork for a replacement on a Friday, unless you aren't adopting. Unless you're covering a tracks. And then I saw the line that made my stomach turn over. The line for place of birth. It didn't say Richmond. It didn't say a hospital. It didn't even say a home birth. In shaky blue typewriter letters, it said unknown. I stared at that word. Unknown. I felt like I was 7 years old again. Standing in the den of this house. It was 1995. I was asking my mother why there were no baby pictures of me. None. Just a void between the day I was supposedly born and my 3rd birthday. I remember the smell of her perfume. Shalimar. It was so thick in the air I could barely breathe. She slammed the photo album shut. So hard the sound echoed through the house. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin, and she hissed, "You're ungrateful. We chose you. We gave you a name." I thought she meant I was chosen out of love. I was wrong. She meant I was selected, like a cut of meat at the grocery store. Unknown isn't a place. It's an erasure. It means that before November 14, 1982, I didn't exist in their world. I was a ghost. A blank slate. My head is pounding, a rhythmic thudding behind my eyes that matches the beat of the grandfather clock downstairs. The estate sale starts at 9 a.m. In 6 hours, strangers are going to walk through this house and touch these things. And they won't know that the walls are built on bones. I look down at the forgery again, at the signature of Evelyn Okonkwo at the bottom. It's bold. It's confident. There's no guilt there. Just a business transaction. She didn't adopt a daughter. She acquired an asset to plug a hole in her life. I wasn't adopted. I was a replacement part ordered like a spare tire for a luxury car. The blood is warm now. It's trailing down my temple, soaking into the collar of the silk blouse. I can feel it, sticky and slow, pulsing in time with the headache that is splitting my skull open. I should probably go to the bathroom. I should probably call 911. But I can't move. I'm paralyzed by the signature staring back at me from the document. Evelyn Okonkwo, in that distinct, sharp loop she taught me to mimic when I was 6. A signature is a promise, Zora, she used to say, her hand hovering over mine, guiding the pen. But this wasn't a promise. This was a sentencing. I tried to force my brain to work, to engage the litigation muscle that usually dissects facts and finds the truth. I need you to understand the gravity of this void. I sat there on the carpet, surrounded by the smell of cedar and old leather, and I tried to recall a single memory from before the age of 4. From before the age of 4, just one. I tried to picture a crib, a specific face smiling down at me. A lullaby. Nothing. It's like a hard drive was wiped. There's just static. I have memories from when we moved to the main house in McLean. I remember the smell of the lemon polish on the floors. I remember the way the light hit the landing. But before that, it's a black wall. I told myself I was overthinking. I wasn't, except for the dream. It comes back sometimes. Usually when I'm stressed, like now. It's not a visual memory so much as a smell. Cedar, wet earth, like a forest floor after rain. And the feeling of rough wool? It's not the smell of Chanel No. 5 that my mother drowned herself in. It's certainly not the smell of this estate. It smells wild, unkept. It smells like poverty, if I'm being honest. And for a second, I'm not Zora Okonkwo in a $3,000 suit. I'm small, I'm cold, and I'm terrified. And then my brain throws up a red flag. 1985. I was 7 years old. There was a kidnapping scare. That's what they called it. The police report exists somewhere, I'm sure. Mother told everyone there was a prowler. A man spotted near the garden wall. She was terrified. She kept me inside for a week. No, wait, let me back up. She didn't just keep me inside, she locked me in the attic. I remember it so clearly. The dust motes dancing in that single shaft of light from the dormer window. The sound of the heavy oak door locking. Click. The deadbolt sliding home. I sat there for days. I scratched at the door until my fingernails bled. I screamed until my voice was gone. I remember pressing my eye to the keyhole, seeing just a sliver of the hallway, watching the shadow move under the door. I thought she was protecting me. I thought she loved me so much she couldn't risk losing me to the bad man. But now, let's look at the evidence. Why lock a child in an attic for a week if the threat is outside? Why was I never allowed to look out the window? Why was I told to be absolutely silent? That doesn't align with the facts. I think about the timeline. The forgery was filed in 82. I was the asset. The replacement? By 1985, I was integrated. I was speaking properly. I looked like her. But maybe someone was asking questions. Maybe someone noticed that the Zora who died in the fire didn't look quite like the Zora sitting in the first grade at McLean Elementary. I'm touching my scar again, the one on my hairline, the one I got from the playground fall in 1982. The date on the death certificate was November 14th, 1982. I've had this scar as long as I can remember. What if I didn't get it on a playground? What if I got it during the acquisition? What if the head wound bleeding right now is connected to the wound that erased who I used to be? I'm sitting on the floor of my dead mother's closet, surrounded by millions of dollars of stolen artifacts, realizing that my entire childhood was a construction, a set design. And this is where it gets really messed up. That kidnapping wasn't someone trying to take me. It was my mother making sure the new Zora stayed put. I was on the floor of the closet, or maybe the hallway by now. Time was doing that thing where it skips. I remember the carpet. It's a Persian runner, silk and wool, very expensive. Now it was stained. I watched the droplets of blood hit the pattern, red on cream. It looked like a Rorschach test. My head. It felt like someone was driving a spike into my left temple. Every heartbeat sent a fresh wave of agony down my neck. I tasted copper. I was choking on it. I had to move. I couldn't just lie here and bleed out. While my mother's ghost watched from the corners of the room, I grabbed the door frame. The wood was cold. I pulled myself up. My legs buckled. I slammed into the wall. The sound was loud, too loud. I froze, listening. Is father home? No, he's dead. Is the nanny here? Clara? She's gone. But the house, it felt alive. The silence was heavy. It was 3017 a.m. I shuffled toward the study. It's about 30 feet from the master suite. 30 feet of agony. I kept my hand on the wall to steady myself. I looked down at my blouse, a charcoal silk theory blouse, ruined, soaked in blood. If the partners at Whitaker could see me now, disheveled, bleeding, cracked, they'd have me on involuntary leave in a heartbeat. I got to the study. I fell into the leather chair behind the desk. The leather squeaked. It was a familiar sound. This is where I win cases. This is where I dismantle people. But tonight I was the one being dismantled. I opened the desk drawer. My hands were shaking so violently that I knocked a Mont Blanc pen onto the floor. I ignored it. I grabbed my phone. The light from the screen cut through the darkness like a blade. I had to squint. My vision was tunneling. Black edges closing in. I unlocked it. I went to the favorites list. Joaquin Castillo. He's a fixer. A cleaner in a cheap suit. He's the best in the district. We used him on the Merriweather acquisition last year. He found the offshore accounts in the Caymans that sank the opposing counsel. He's loyal to the dollar. That I can trust. I started his name. I need you to understand the gravity of this. I am a creature of the law. I believe in procedure. But procedure would mean an EMT, a police report, an investigation. And if they start investigating me, they'll find the safe. They'll find the birth certificate. They'll find out that Zora Okonkwo is a stolen commodity. I pressed the call button. I put it on speaker because I couldn't hold the phone to my ear. I needed both hands to stop the trembling. Ring. 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 Come on, Joaquin. Pick up. The call log showed the time. 3:21 a.m. Duration, Sierra Lee salmon ham. It felt like an hour. Finally, a click. A gravelly voice. Zora, you know what time it is? I couldn't breathe. I looked at the blood on my hand, smeared across the mahogany desk. It looked like evidence. I said, Joaquin, listen to me. Don't ask questions. Just listen. I'm listening. I need you to come to McLean. To the house. Now. But you can't come to the front door. The security system logs every entry. You need to use the service entrance on the north side. The gate code is 4592 Alpha. There was a pause on the line. I could hear him breathing. He was a smoker. I could hear the rattle in his chest. Are you in trouble? I almost laughed. A dry, broken sound. Trouble? I'm a ghost in a machine. I'm injured, I said. My voice sounded weak. Thinner than usual, and I need someone who knows how to keep their mouth shut. Medical emergency. You need 911. No. No police. No hospitals. Just come here. Bring your medical kit. The one you brought to the office when you got that shiner in Baltimore. And bring the bag. The evidence bag. He hesitated. Lawyers don't usually make calls like this. Not corporate litigators. Not ones who bill $900 an hour. This is off the books, Zora. My rate doubles for 3 a.m. house calls. I'll pay you $20,000. Cash. From the safe in the library, just get here before I pass out. I'm 20 minutes out. The line went dead. The screen went black. I dropped the phone on the desk. I just sat there. The silence rushed back in. The throbbing in my head was a dull roar now. I looked around the room at the diplomas, the awards, the photos of me with senators. A lifetime of achievement. A lifetime of lies. I reached for a tissue to wipe the blood from my forehead, but I just smeared it further. I looked at my hands again. They didn't feel like mine. They felt like the hands of the girl in the Polaroid. The girl I was meant to replace. I'm a lawyer. I know how to bury things, but for the first time, I don't know if I want to bury the evidence or dig up the grave. You know that sound a grandfather clock makes when it's the only thing breathing in a $5 million house? Tick. Tock. It's not comforting. It's an audit. It's counting down the seconds until you have to answer for something. I sat on the floor of the living room for exactly 20 minutes. That's a 200 seconds. From 3:21 a.m. to 3:41 a.m. I watched the blood on my forehead dry into a tight, itchy crust. Every time I blinked, I could feel the skin pulling. I tried to wipe it with a tissue. I really did. But I only succeeded in smearing a thin, rusty streak across my eyebrow. I looked like a victim in a law enforcement textbook. The irony wasn't lost on me. I've spent 20 years putting people behind bars for messes like this. And here I was, sitting in my own crime scene. But this wasn't a crime of passion. It was a discovery, and discoveries don't bleed, but they certainly can kill you. The text came at 3:41 a.m. No buzzing, just a silent vibration against the marble floor. Here. That was it. Joaquin Castillo doesn't do small talk. He's a cleaner, a fixer. For $20,000, he doesn't ask questions, he just makes problems disappear. But this problem was heavy. I stood up too fast. The room tilted. The Persian runner beneath my feet seemed to lurch to the left, and the blood rushed in my ears like a freight train. I had to grip the back of a leather sofa to keep from going down. I need you to understand the gravity of this. I am a woman who argues in front of the Supreme Court. I manage million-dollar mergers before my morning espresso, but right then, I was terrified of passing out alone in a hallway smelling of lemon polish and old money. I made it to the service entrance. It's a heavy steel door off the kitchen, the kind the staff uses. The delivery guys, the caterers, the people who are supposed to be invisible. Why the service door? Because the front door has a camera, a high-definition wide-angle lens that uploads directly to a cloud server managed by Whitaker & Associates, my father's firm. I couldn't risk a digital log entry showing Joaquin Castillo on my doorstep at 3:45 a.m. In this house, information is currency, and I was currently bankrupt. I punched in the code 4592 alpha. The deadbolt slid back with a heavy thud. I opened the door, and the chill of the night air hit me like a physical blow. It smelled like rain and wet asphalt. Joaquin was standing there, silhouetted by the motion sensor light. He didn't smile, he just looked at me. His eyes went straight to the blood on my forehead, then down to the manila folder clutched against my chest like a shield. He didn't say, "Are you okay?" He didn't say what happened. He just stepped inside, closed the door, and locked it behind him. That's why I pay him the big bucks. We walked to the living room in silence. The only sound was the crunch of gravel on his boots and the hum of the refrigerator. I felt like I was walking to the gallows. I sat on the sofa. He sat in the leather armchair opposite me. He didn't take off his jacket. I placed the folder on the coffee table. The mahogany was polished to a shine, so dark it looked like a pool of black water. "Open it," I said. My voice sounded thin, reedy. Not like me at all. He reached out. He was wearing black leather gloves. He opened the folder. He stared at the death certificate first. Zora Okonkwo. Died November 14, 1982. Smoke inhalation, thermal injury. He didn't react. He just nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible dip of his chin. Then he picked up the application for delayed registration of birth. Filed November 17, 1982. 3 days. A dead child replaced by a living one in 72 hours. He held the birth certificate up to the light. He turned it over. He ran a gloved thumb over the state seal. "The embossing is real," he said. His voice was low, gravelly. "This isn't a forgery in the sense that someone typed it up in their basement. This paper came from the Commonwealth of Virginia Vital Records Office." He looked at me. The light from the floor lamp cast harsh shadows across his face, highlighting the lines around his mouth. "This seal, it's state-level work. This requires access, connections. Someone inside the registrar's office signed off on this." I felt the cold shiver work its way down my spine. It wasn't just a lie my mother told, it was a conspiracy, a systemic erasure of a human life. "Look at the signature," I whispered. "Evelyn Okonkwo." "I see it," Joaquin said, "but look at the witness signature. It's not your father." I hadn't even noticed that. I leaned forward, ignoring the sharp spike of pain in my head. He was right. It was a name I didn't recognize. C. Higgins. Who was C. Higgins? And why did they sign off on my existence? Joaquin put the documents down. He took a deep breath. He looked around the room, at the portraits on the walls, at the curtains, at the life I had built, on a foundation of sand. He looked back at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than professional detachment in his eyes. I saw fear. Genuine, unsettled fear. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Zora, he said. He didn't call me Ms. Okonkwo. He used my first name. I've seen bad things. I've cleaned up bad things. But this? He tapped the folder with a gloved finger. This wasn't a black market deal. This feels like a cover-up for something bigger. Let's look at the evidence. Or rather, let's look at the absence of it for 2 days. After Joaquin walked out of my house at 4 a.m., carrying the only things that tethered me to reality, I didn't sleep. I sat in my home office, surrounded by leather-bound law books I've read 100 times, and I waited. The silence in that house, it was heavy. It smelled like old paper and the lingering scent of my mother's Chanel, No. 5. It seemed to seep out of the walls just to mock me. I was starting to think he wasn't coming back. I thought about the Cayman account. I thought about the gate code. I felt like a prisoner in my own life. Then at 11:17 p.m. on Tuesday, the screen on my MacBook Pro lit up. It was Joaquin. No text, just an email with a subject line. Paper match. I clicked it. My hand was actually shaking, just a little tremor, but enough that I missed the trackpad the first time. Attached was a PDF report from a forensic document examiner Joaquin knows in Baltimore. Guy's a genius with ink and fiber. The report was dense tables, isotopic ratios, spectral imaging data. But I didn't need a degree to understand the conclusion highlighted in yellow at the bottom. The paper, the physical sheet of paper my birth certificate was printed on. It wasn't just heavy bond paper bought at the Staples, it was government stock, security watermarked. And here's the part that doesn't align with the facts. That specific batch of paper was reported stolen during a burglary at the Pulaski County Clerk's office in Little Rock, Arkansas in November of 1982. Little Rock, I said it out loud. It sounded foreign in my mouth. I spent 46 years in the DMV, DC, Maryland, Virginia. My father was a senator. I went to UVA. I clerked for the Fourth Circuit. My entire existence is wrapped up in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I have no connection to Arkansas, none. But the dates, the timeline is airtight. The theft happened November 12, 1982. The original Zora died November 14th. The forged birth certificate was filed November 17th. Within 5 days, stolen property from Arkansas was used to legalize me in McLean. Do you understand what that means? It means this wasn't a panic decision made by a grieving mother in a hospital hallway. This was a pre-planned operation with a supply chain, a pipeline. They had the paper ready. They were waiting for a body. I stared at the screen, reading the watermark analysis over and over. Pulaski County. The same county where the... Wait, I need you to understand the gravity of this. I was scrolling through the attached images of the watermarks and outline of the state capitol building, very distinct, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. The walls of the office were closing in. My mother, Evelyn, she hated the South. She used to call it flyover country. Why Arkansas? I was born in Virginia. At least that's what they told me. That's the lie I built my career on. If the paper that made me a citizen came from a heist in Little Rock, who was I before I was Zora? Where did I actually come from? Pulaski County. Little Rock, Arkansas. I stared at those words in the forensic report until they blurred into an indistinct smear. Let's look at the evidence. My mother, Evelyn Okonkwo, was a woman who turned her nose up at anything south. She used to say the humidity ruined the intellect and the manners were non-existent. But the paper used to forge my existence? Stolen from a clerk's office in Little Rock. That doesn't align with the facts. If she despised the region so much, why was she sourcing a child from there? It implies a connection, a pre-existing supply chain. You don't go to a grocery store, you hate to buy bread. You go where the supply is reliable. And in late 1982, for people like the Okonkwo's, Arkansas was reliable. Joaquin was sitting at my desk, the harsh blue light of the MacBook Pro illuminating the deep lines of his face. It was past midnight now. The house was dead silent, save for the aggressive clicking of his mechanical keyboard. I was sitting on the edge of the leather sofa, my hands clasped in my lap so tight my knuckles were white. I felt cold, a bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with the thermostat. We treat this like a deposition, Joaquin said, his voice gravelly and low. We narrow the scope. We have a stolen watermark from Pulaski County. We have a transaction date of November 1982. That means the acquisition happened within a 30-day window prior to the filing. He pulled up the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NAMUS. I'd seen that database used in class action lawsuits, usually tracking down witnesses or assets. Never this. I'm filtering, he said. White female. Born late 1978 to early 1979 to match the age of 4. Disappeared late 1982. Location, Arkansas. Let's see who falls out of the data tree. The screen flickered as the search executed. A list populated. My heart was doing that thing where it skips a beat and then races to catch up, hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. We have 3 viable candidates, Joaquin announced. He swiveled the monitor around so I could see it better. Sarah Jenkins, vanished from a grocery store parking lot in Fayetteville. Mary Beth Tolliver, taken from her backyard in Jonesboro. And he paused, his finger hovering over the trackpad. And Leila Vance. He clicked the link. A digitized newspaper article from the Arkansas Gazette loaded onto the screen. The date was December 3rd, 1982. I leaned in, reading the bold black headline. Vance family devastated by disappearance of daughter Leila. 4. I needed to understand the gravity of this. I read the caption under the photo, squinting at the pixelated text. The little girl was last seen wearing a red plaid dress. Police have no leads. The family is offering a reward of $5,000. $5,000? That was the price of a decent used car in 1982. I remember the receipt in the safe. My mother paid 10 times that for me. $10,000 for a human life. The math made me sick. Zoom in on the photo, I whispered. My voice didn't sound like my own. It sounded thin, brittle. Joaquin tapped a key. The image expanded. It was grainy, a scan of a 30-year-old print. She was standing next to a metal tricycle on a concrete porch. Her hair was dark, a chaotic mess of curls, just like mine. I felt a phantom sensation, a ghost itch on the bridge of my nose. The shape of it, the slope of the forehead, the set of the eyes. It was familiar. It was uncanny. I stared at the screen, my breath hitching in my throat. The girl was smiling at the camera, a wide, innocent grin that didn't know she was about to be erased. And there, undeniable in the center of her mouth, was a distinct triangular gap between her 2 front teeth. I stopped breathing. I flashed back to the orthodontist's office in D.C. My mother was furious about that gap. She said it made me look rural, common. I hated that dentist. I hated the pain. But I loved her, so I let them fix it. The girl in the photo had the same gap. I think that's me. Let's look at the evidence. I had the photograph. I had the timeline. I had the distinct anatomical anomaly of a diastema, a gap between the maxillary central incisors. In a court of law, that is considered circumstantial, but to me it was a verdict. I was ready to book a flight to Little Rock, find the graveyard where her father was buried. And I don't know. What do you do when you find your own ghost? I needed to be sure. I needed biological confirmation. I don't deal in hunches. I deal in facts. And the fact was, I needed DNA. I found Martha Vance, Leila's mother. She's 82 years old now, living in a senior facility in Dayton, Ohio. I couldn't just walk in there. I can't exactly waltz into a nursing home and ask an octogenarian for a cheek swab. That raises questions. It leaves a paper trail, so I watched. I established a pattern of behavior. I found out she went to a diner every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Betty's Kitchen. Smelled like fried onions, floor wax, and stale coffee. I sat in the booth directly behind her. I wore a Cincinnati Reds baseball cap pulled low. I felt like a predator. I felt like my mother. She ordered the meatloaf. I ordered black coffee I didn't touch. She drank tea, Earl Grey, 2 sugars. When she got up to use the restroom, leaving her purse on the seat, I didn't hesitate. I moved fast. I grabbed the styrofoam cup. It was still warm. Condensation was slick on the side. The rim had a faint, greasy, pink stain, Revlon, shade cherries in the snow. I slipped it into a sterile evidence bag I'd bought at a CVS pharmacy 20 minutes earlier. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it. I walked out to the beige Honda Civic I'd rented at the airport, nothing flashy, nothing memorable, and drove straight to a motel. A roach-infested Days Inn off I-75. The room smelled like bleach and cheap tobacco. I sat on the polyester bedspread and stared at that styrofoam cup in the plastic bag for 3 hours. I sent it overnight via FedEx to a private genetics lab in Baltimore. I used a shell company, Argus Holdings, to pay for it. I paid extra for the rush processing. $4,000 for the truth. Those 3 days were the longest of my life. I didn't sleep. The hum of the vending machine outside my door sounded like a swarm of bees. I kept running the math, the teeth, the age, the Arkansas connection. The math was perfect. It was a closed loop. I told myself I was preparing for the reunion. I was practicing what I'd say to her. I'm Leela. I'm alive. I even bought a card, a blank card with a picture of a bluebird on the front. Monday morning, 6:30 a.m. The email notification on my iPhone lit up the dark room. Results ready. My heart, God, it actually stopped. For a full second, I couldn't breathe. I sat up, swinging my legs over the edge of the bed. The carpet was damp. I opened the PDF. I scrolled past the mitochondrial haplogroup data, past the ancestry composition, and landed on the relationship section. Probability of relatedness, 0.0%. Not a distant relative. Not a cousin, 0. I read it 5 times, 0. The math wasn't just wrong, it was a lie. The teeth, the gap, the hair. It was all a coincidence. A cruel, statistically impossible coincidence. I sat there, staring at the screen, the blue light washing out my face, and I realized I wasn't Layla Vance. I wasn't Zora Okonkwo. The DNA test just told me I belonged to nobody. I sat there on the floor of the home office for what felt like hours, just staring at the DNA results on my phone screen. 0.0%. It's a strange thing to feel your entire existence dissolve into a statistical anomaly. I wasn't Zora Okonkwo. That much we knew. And according to Martha Vance's genetic code, I wasn't Lila Vance either. I was a biological ghost haunting a life I never earned. The silence in the house was heavy, pressing against my ears like physical weight. I needed to move. I needed to do something other than spiral into the void of my own genetics. So I turned back to the safe. The mahogany door was still gaping open, the brass handle cold to the touch. I dumped the remaining contents onto the Persian rug. Desmotes danced in the moonlight, mocking me. Receipts for Saks Fifth Avenue from 1983. A deed for a property in the Caymans. Nothing that mattered. Until I saw it, tucked underneath a stack of old brokerage statements, a single sheet of heavy cream-colored vellum. It wasn't crumpled like the others. It was flat, precise, terrifyingly legal. I picked it up. The header read, Mutual Release and Severance Agreement. The date was January 14th, 1986. And the name printed in bold black courier font was Clara Higgins. My heart stopped. C. Higgins. I had seen that name before. On my forged birth certificate, I always assumed C. Higgins was a corrupt clerk in the Virginia Vital Records office. A necessary cog in the bureaucratic machine that Mother had oiled with bribes. But this was a domestic employment contract. Clara Higgins was the nanny, the woman who raised me from the age of 3 until I was 6. I remember her face. It's coming back to me in flashes, like a broken film reel. She wasn't like the others. She didn't look at me with that cold, assessing gaze Mother had. She looked at me with pity. I remember sitting on a velvet stool in my bedroom, the sunlight hitting the dust on the dresser. She was brushing my hair. She used this silver brush with soft bristles. She pulled a little too hard, and I winced, and she leaned down. I can smell her breath mint, and maybe a little bit of coffee. She whispered right into my ear, Don't trust them, Zora. Whatever you do, don't trust them. Then she kissed the top of my head, a single tear landing on my shoulder. It was hot. It felt like a burn. 3 days later, she was gone. Mother told me she had stolen some silver and was fired. That she was a criminal. That was the narrative. But the document in my hands told a different story. It was a silence agreement. The employee agrees to never discuss the terms of employment or the private matters of the Okonkwo family. And the severance payment, I had to do the math twice, $250,000. In 1986, using an inflation calculator, that is nearly $700,000 today. Actually, with interest, it's probably close to $1 million. You don't pay a nanny $1 million to keep quiet about stealing a silver spoon. That is the kind of money you pay to cover up a felony, a kidnapping. A replacement. I realized something then. If Clara was there from 1983 to 1986, she saw the transition. She saw me arrive. She saw who I was before Mother put me in that ugly plaid dress and cut my hair. She knows my name, the real one, and the timeline she left in 1986. That was the same year I started having the nightmares. The same year Mother installed the deadbolt on the attic door. I thought I was being punished for acting out. But what if I was acting out because Clara told me the truth? What if Mother fired her not because she stole something, but because she was teaching me to remember? This changes everything. The Lila Vance lead was a dead end, a cruel coincidence of dental gaps and hair color. But Clara isn't a dead end. She's a witness. And they didn't fire her. They paid her off. She knows where I came from. I didn't pack a bag. I just got in the car. It was 11 p.m. on a Tuesday when I pulled out of the driveway in McLean. And by the time I hit the I-95 South ramp, my hands were still trembling against the leather steering wheel. The severance agreement gave me the clue I needed, a forwarding address scribbled in the margin of a brokerage statement from 1987. Augusta, Georgia. It took Joaquin 4 hours to cross-reference that with voter registration records and credit card alerts to find her current facility. Savannah Palliative Care. Doesn't exactly sound like the Ritz-Carlton, does it? I drove through the night. The dashcam footage is just a blur of taillights and asphalt, but I remember the silence inside the cabin. It was deafening. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Clara's signature on that birth certificate. C. Higgins. She was there. She watched them bring me into that house. She watched my mother hand over that check for $250,000. I kept asking myself, what did she see? What did I look like to her? Was I crying? Was I dirty? Or was I just merchandise? I arrived at 4:15 a.m. The sun wasn't even up yet. The building is a single-story brick structure tucked behind an overgrown hedge. The paint on the handrail is peeling, and there were moths fluttering around the flickering security light. It's a far cry from the marble floors and climate-controlled wine cellars I grew up in. This place smelled like stagnation, like things that had been forgotten. I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes. I couldn't move. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror and saw a stranger. I am a litigator. I dismantle corporations for breakfast. I stare down witnesses in hostile depositions. But this, walking into the room of the woman who held me when I was a stolen child, that felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. I finally opened the door at 4:40 a.m. The automatic glass door slid open with a sluggish groan. And then it hit me. The air inside the lobby was thick, heavy. It wasn't just the smell of antiseptic or old coffee. It was something deeper, something earthy and damp and wrong. My brain did a somersault. I was instantly transported back to the attic. The lock clicking shut, the darkness pressing in on me. And that smell that haunted my nightmares for 30 years. Cedar, wet earth, rotting wood. I tasted bile in the back of my throat. I realized I wasn't just walking into a nursing home. I was walking back into the exact sensory landscape of my own trauma. I grabbed the wall to steady myself. The receptionist looked up, annoyed, but I couldn't speak. The smell of cedar and disinfectant hit me. It was the smell from my nightmares. I remember staring at the receptionist's name tag, Brenda. It was crooked. I focused on that crooked little piece of plastic because if I looked up, I was going to bomb it. The smell was assaulting me. Cedar and wet earth. It was the attic. It was the dream. It was everywhere. I could feel the sweat breaking out on my upper lip, cold and clammy. I'm a litigator. I spend my days in courtrooms arguing precedent. But there is no precedent for standing in a nursing home in Augusta, Georgia, smelling your own childhood trauma. I managed to force the words out. My voice sounded like it belonged to a stranger, scraped and thin. I need to see Clara Higgins, now. I flashed my bar association card. Like, that meant anything here. Like, it gave me jurisdiction over grief. She gave me the visitor pass, a sticker that said guest in bright yellow. I slapped it onto my chest. It felt like a target. Room 304 is at the end of the hall. The walk there felt like a death row march. The fluorescent lights were buzzing that constant low-frequency hum that drills into your skull. Underneath the disinfectant smell, the cedar was getting stronger. It was coming from the room. It was leaking out from under the door like toxic gas. I pushed it open. The room was dark, illuminated only by the glow of a heart monitor and a street lamp outside the window. The air conditioning was blasting, keeping the room at a frigid 65 degrees. Clara Higgins was in the bed. She looked diminished. In my memories, she's a giant, a monolith of authority in a starched uniform. But the woman in the bed was barely a lump under the sheets. I walked to the chair. My legs felt like lead weights. I sat down. The vinyl was cold against the back of my thighs. I told myself I was just there to depose a witness. Just the facts, Zora, I thought. Get the testimony and get out. I must have made a sound, or maybe she just sensed me, because her eyes flew open. I'd seen a lot of things in this line of work. I've seen criminals break down on the stand. I've seen CEOs cry over indictments. But I've never seen eyes like that. Pure, unadulterated terror. She wasn't looking at Zora Okonkwo, the lawyer. She was looking at a corpse. She screamed. It wasn't a loud scream. It was a gasp, a jagged intake of air that sounded like tearing paper. The little ghost, she hissed. The little ghost is back. I tried to grab her hand to calm her down, to establish contact, to show her I was real, but she snatched her hand away. Her fingers were claws digging into my wrist. She pulled me forward off the chair until my face was inches from hers. The smell hit me then full force. It wasn't coming from the ventilator. It was coming from her. It was the smell of that cabin. You, she said. Her breath smelled like old peppermint and rot. I told the mistress you weren't right. I froze. Not right? What are you talking about, Clara? Tell me about the money. Tell me about the severance. She laughed, a dry, rattling cough that shook her frail frame. Money? She paid me to forget the cabin. She paid me to forget the cold. $250,000 to forget the ice on your eyelids. I asked her about the receipt, the payment. I wasn't bought. She shook her head frantically. No, found. In the woods. West Virginia. The snow was so high we had to dig you out. The room started to spin. West Virginia, not Arkansas, not Pulaski County. West Virginia, not Arkansas, not Pulaski County. You were harvested, she whispered, the word dropping like a stone into deep water, like a weed growing where it shouldn't be. Evelyn didn't buy you. She found you dying in the snow and took what was left. I looked at this woman who wiped my face and locked me in the attic. She was the only link to the beginning. I felt the nausea rising again. Harvested. A product. A biological find. All that time in the attic, the deadbolt, the fear, it wasn't to keep me in. It was to keep the truth of what I was out. She squeezed my wrist harder, her grip surprisingly iron for someone so close to death. She looked me dead in the eye, and the terror was replaced by a cold, knowing sadness. She whispered, "You weren't the first choice, Zora. You were just the only one who survived the winter." Harvested. That word is still echoing in my head, bouncing off the sterile white walls of this nursing home, bouncing off the inside of my skull. Clara said I wasn't the first choice. I was just the only one who survived the winter. I need you to understand the gravity of that statement. It means there were others. It means my mother Evelyn was shopping in the slaughterhouse, and I was the only piece of meat left breathing. I sat there in that vinyl chair looking at Clara, waiting for the nausea to pass, but it didn't. It just got worse. Clara started to mutter, pulling at the hem of her blanket, her eyes darting around the room like she was checking for wiretaps. She leaned forward, her breath smelling of peppermint and decay, and she whispered something that shattered my entire reality. She said the fire wasn't the end, Zora. It was the cover-up. I froze. I asked her what she was talking about. I said, "Clara, there's a death certificate. There's a grave in Richmond." But Clara just shook her head. She looked at me with such pity, such absolute pity. And she said, Evelyn couldn't bear to let her go. Not really. Not when there was a chance she could still be useful. Useful. The word tasted like bile in my mouth. Clara reached under her pillow with a shaking hand. Her movements were slow, deliberate, like she was handling a bomb. She pulled out a piece of paper and shoved it into my palm. I looked down. It wasn't a legal document. It wasn't a notarized statement. It was a napkin. A crumpled white paper napkin from a diner, stained with grease and a ring of black coffee. It smelled exactly like my nightmares. That sharp scent of cedar and wet earth. It wasn't a metaphor. It was literal. That smell was imprinted on the fibers of this paper. I flattened it out against my knee. There were numbers scrawled in blue ink. Coordinates. Latitude 38 degrees, 59 minutes. Longitude 77 degrees, 44 minutes. I know those numbers. I know that grid. I've looked at enough property deeds to recognize the topography of the West Virginia border. Those coordinates point to a location 3 miles outside of Harper's Ferry. Deep in the woods, isolated, unreachable. I looked at Clara, waiting for an explanation. She just stared at the door, her voice barely a whisper. "She's there," Clara said. "The real Zora, the one who burned." My brain short-circuited. Let's look at the evidence. The official story is that Zora Okonkwo died of thermal injury on November 14, 1982. But if Clara is right, if the body in that grave is a John Doe or a stolen corpse, then the original heir never died. She was hidden away, disfigured, locked in a cage like an animal, while I was paraded around in her clothes, playing with her toys, living a life that was never meant for me. Evelyn didn't just replace a child. She kept the spare. And for what? Insurance? Leverage? Or just pure, unadulterated ego? I looked at the grease stain on that napkin, and I realized that my entire existence is a fabrication built on top of a dungeon. My sister didn't die in a fire. She's been alive, locked in a cabin, while I lived her life. I need you to understand the gravity of this. I didn't just drive to West Virginia. I drove off the edge of the map. I left Augusta, Georgia at 6 a.m. on the dot, and I didn't stop until the asphalt ran out. You know that feeling when you're watching a horror movie and the protagonist goes into the basement and you just want to scream at them to turn back? That was me, except I was screaming at myself and I didn't listen, because the evidence was in the glove box. That crumpled napkin with the grease stain and the coordinates. 38 degrees, 59 minutes north, 77 degrees, 44 minutes west. It was the only lead I had left. I took the Range Rover. Thank God I did, because a sedan would have torn its axle off an hour ago. I watched the blue line on the Google Maps timeline get thinner and thinner as I left I-81, winding deeper into the Shenandoah Valley. The signal on my iPhone started flickering around 3 p.m., right around the time I hit Harper's Ferry. I was looking for a street address, a mailbox, a driveway, something tangible, but there was nothing. Just trees. Endless suffocating walls of oak and pine that blocked out the sun. At 3:47 p.m., the screen went gray. The notification said, "No service. Last known ping 12 minutes ago." And this is where it gets really messed up. I wasn't just lost, I was being erased. I pulled over where the dirt road became a goat trail. I sat there for a full 5 minutes, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, trying to talk myself out of what I was about to do. A rational person would have turned around. A rational person would have called Joaquin. But I'm not a rational person anymore. I'm a woman who found out she's a stolen commodity. I grabbed the hiking boots I bought at a Walmart in Winchester and stepped out of the car. The silence was absolute. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. It was the kind of silence you only find in places where people aren't supposed to be. And then the wind shifted. I smelled it. Cedar, wet earth, rotting leaves. It hit me like a physical blow to the chest, knocking the air out of my lungs. That smell from my dreams, the smell from Clara's room, it wasn't a metaphor. It was a geographical marker. I had been here before. My body remembered what my mind had tried to forget. I hiked the last mile. The terrain was unforgiving, steep ravines and jagged rocks tearing at the cheap rubber soles. I was sweating in my theory wool coat, freezing at the same time. My brain was doing that thing where it tries to bargain with reality. I told myself I'd find an abandoned hunting lodge, a shed, anything but what I actually found. The trees parted just enough to reveal a clearing in a hollow, and there it was, a cabin. But let's look at the evidence, shall we? This wasn't some quaint weekend getaway. There were no flower boxes, no welcome mat. The windows were blacked out with plywood from the inside, and the chimney wasn't stone. It was reinforced steel. There was a perimeter line, stakes driven into the ground every 10 feet, rusted but deliberate. This wasn't a home. It was a fortress. It was a facility. I walked up to the porch, the wood groaning under my weight, and I felt that cold, clammy feeling of being watched. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I reached the front door expecting to find it rotting off its hinges, but it wasn't. It was solid steel, reinforced with iron bars. I looked down at the handle, and the blood in my veins turned to ice. There was a chain on the door and a lock the size of a dinner plate. Someone didn't want people getting out. I stared at that rusted iron hasp, my brain refusing to process the geometry of it. The lock was on the outside. You don't put a deadbolt on the outside to keep burglars out. You do it to keep prisoners in. I was standing on a porch in West Virginia, shivering. I realized that my entire childhood was a fabrication built on top of a dungeon. The air coming through the gap in the woods smelled exactly like my nightmares. Cedar. Wet earth. And underneath that, the sharp, metallic tang of old blood. It wasn't just a smell, it was a sensory memory I had been repressing. I didn't think. I just reacted. I turned and ran back to the Range Rover. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might bruise the tissue. I yanked the rear door open and grabbed the tire iron. It was heavy, cold, covered in a fine layer of Virginia clay dust. I ran back to the cabin. I didn't care about fingerprints. I didn't care about the law. I raised the iron and swung. The sound was sickening. A wet crunch as the rotten wood around the hasp gave way. Splinters flew into my face. I hit it again and again until the lock hung loose, impotent. I pushed the door open. It didn't creak. It groaned, a low, agonized sound. The chain that had been draped across the inside clattered to the floor like a dead snake. I stepped into the dark. I clicked on my iPhone flashlight. The LED beam cut through the gloom, illuminating particles of dust suspended like frozen stars. It was a single room, no windows, just black plywood walls. There was a bed frame, stripped to the rusted springs. There was a bucket in the corner overflowing with... I couldn't look. And there was a wheelchair, an old vinyl wheelchair. It was facing the corner. Someone was sitting in it. My stomach dropped. It was that physical sensation you get on a roller coaster. I told myself I was hallucinating. I told myself this was a stress response. But the flashlight beam reflected off a pair of black patent leather shoes. Small feet. Feet that hadn't walked in years. I realized with a lawyer's cold certainty that the chain of custody for my life had been broken. I took a step forward. The floorboards screamed under my boots. Hello? The word barely escaped my throat. It was a whisper. A plea. The chair didn't move. The silence in that room was heavy, pressurized. It felt like the air had been sucked out, replaced by decades of suffering. I took another step. Closer now. I could hear it. A sound. A wet, rattling inhalation, like air struggling through a damaged windpipe. I raised the light higher, angling it toward the figure. Who are you? I cross-examined hostile witnesses for a living, but my voice was shaking. The chair began to turn. Slowly, the metal frame creaked, a rusty, rhythmic protest. Squeak! Turn! Squeak! Turn! My heart was beating so fast I could feel a pulse thumping. I braced myself. I didn't know what I was expecting. A ghost? A corpse? The chair completed its rotation. The flashlight hit the face. I need you to understand the gravity of this. I have seen autopsy photos. I have seen crime scene evidence that would make a seasoned detective vomit. But nothing prepared me for this. The face was a ruin. It was a topographical map of pain. The skin was rippled, fused, shiny keloid scars. There were no lips, just a slit. The nose was mostly gone. It looked like wax that had melted and then hardened in a grotesque, uneven shape. This was the face of someone who had been in a fire, a thermal injury event. The fire that killed me? No, the fire that killed her in 1982. But the eyes... God, the eyes, they were untouched. Clear, piercing ice blue. I knew those eyes. I had looked into them every single day of my life in the mirror. But these were older. These were hardened by 40 years of darkness. They were my father's eyes, Arthur Okonkwo's eyes. The woman in the chair looked at me. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look confused. She looked at me with an expression of profound, ancient exhaustion. She looked right through the expensive clothes, through the law degree, through the name Zora Okonkwo. She saw the liar beneath. She opened her scarred mouth, struggling to form words around tissue that wasn't meant to speak. The sound was a rasp, like dry leaves skittering on pavement, or smoke escaping a chimney. She looked at me with my father's eyes and said, "Mother sent you to finish the job, didn't she?" Finish the job? The accusation hung in the damp air of that cabin, heavier than the smell of wet earth and rot. I need you to understand the gravity of this. I am a litigator. I deal in facts, in evidence, in hard numbers. But looking at this woman, seeing the melted skin, the twisted hands, those ice blue eyes that matched my own, the air just left the room. I backed up until my spine hit the rough plywood wall. "No," I said, my voice cracked, betraying me. "I didn't come here to finish anything." I looked at the plastic bucket in the corner. The rusted springs of the bed. This was her life? For 40 years? "I came to find out who I am," I told her, stepping closer to the wheelchair, "because my life is a lie." She stared at me, assessing me like a hostile witness on the stand. Then she relaxed. Just a fraction. The vinyl seat of the chair creaked in the silence. "You look like her," she whispered, "but you aren't her." Then she started to talk. The story came out in fragments. Broken glass, heavy footsteps. November 14th, 1982. I know that date. It's burned into my brain now. It's on my forged birth certificate. It's the day I was legally born and the day the real Zora Okonkwo supposedly died in a fire. "It wasn't an accident," she said. Her voice was raspy, dry like leaves skittering on pavement. "Arthur was home. He was always home when the bad things happened." My brain flashed back to 1990. The sound of crystal shattering in the den of the McLean estate. The smell of scotch so thick it made my eyes water. Senator Okonkwo. My father. A man the Washington Post called a pillar of the community. A liar. "He was high," she said, closing her eyes. "Cocaine," he was sweating. "Nervous." He knocked over the kerosene heater in the den. I visualized it, the Persian rug catching fire, the old mahogany going up like kindling. The heat. "I was on the floor," she said. A shudder went through her ruined body. "My nightgown, it caught before I could stand up." Oh God, the imagery. It makes me sick to my stomach. I can feel the phantom heat. I screamed, "Daddy, Daddy, help me." She paused. She looked up at the black plywood ceiling as if the smoke stains were still there. And he looked at me. He didn't move to get water. He didn't move to get me. "What did he do?" I asked. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I already knew the answer. I could feel it in my gut, cold and heavy. "He stepped over me," she said. "He grabbed the leather briefcase from the desk. The one with the Cayman Islands bank records. The blackmail files. He protected the paper, Zora. He saved the documents." My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the flashlight. The beam danced across her face, illuminating the horror that Arthur Okonkwo had inflicted. "He left you there," I whispered. "He left you to burn?" "He needed a body," she said, her voice hardening into something metallic. "A body to explain the absence. But he needed the money more. He needed the leverage to stay in the Senate." I reached up and touched the straight line of scar tissue on my own hairline. The playground lie. Mother always said I fell off the swings. I believed it. I trusted them. But it wasn't a fall. It was a transaction. My father, no, Senator Okonkwo, burned his daughter alive because she was inconvenient. He walked away from a burning child to save a bank account. And then what did he do? He went out and bought a replacement. He spent $50,000 to buy a little girl from Arkansas so he wouldn't have to explain why the real Zora was gone. He stitched me into their lives like I was a patch on a torn coat. You know that feeling when the world just stops spinning? That was me, standing in that rotting cabin in the middle of nowhere, realizing I was nothing more than a prop and a cover-up. "He wasn't a grieving parent," I said aloud. The realization tasted like ash in my mouth. He was a monster who burned his daughter and bought a new one to cover the tracks. I looked at her, the real Zora, the survivor of his greed. "I'm going to destroy him," I said. The rage was clean, sharp. "I'm going to take everything he has. The house, the money, the legacy. I'm going to burn it all down." And for the first time, she smiled. It was a terrifying, broken thing, but it was a smile. "Good," she said. "I need you to understand the gravity of this moment." I wasn't just angry, I was nuclear. Standing in that cabin, looking at a woman who had the same ice blue eyes, As the man I called father, I felt the logical part of my brain, the lawyer part, just disintegrate. Let's look at the evidence. I had a loaded Glock 19 in my purse. Virginia concealed handgun permit number 092481. Valid. Lawful. I knew exactly how to use it. For a split second, the calculation was terrifyingly simple. It's a 3-hour drive back to McLean. I could be at the estate by 7:30 p.m. I could walk into that library, put 2 rounds in Arthur Okonkwo's chest and 2 in Evelyn's, and be done with it. It would be over, the debt paid. That aligns with the facts of vengeance, doesn't it? An eye for an eye, a life for a life. I stood there, my hand hovering over my bag, literally shaking with the adrenaline of it. And then I felt it, a hand on my wrist. It was dry, it felt like crumpled paper, rough and scarred, but the grip was surprisingly strong. I looked down, and the original Zora was staring up at me. She didn't speak with words, really, just a rasp of air. But I heard her. She pulled my hand away from the bag. She shook her head slowly. "Don't let them win," she whispered. Her voice sounded like wind through dead leaves. "That's what they want. A tragedy, a mess." She looked at the leather briefcase on the floor. The one with the Cayman Islands bank records and the blackmail files. "Take the money," she said. "Burn it down. Don't just kill them, ruin them." I stopped breathing. You know that feeling when the world shifts on its axis? That was it. She was right. Of course she was right. I am a litigator. I don't pull triggers. I dismantle lives in courtrooms. If I kill them, they become victims. If I shoot them, I'm just a crazy daughter with a gun. But if I take the money, if I use the evidence in that briefcase to expose the offshore accounts, the bribery, the fact that they bought a child like a piece of furniture, that destroys the legacy, that erases the Okonkwo name from history books. I sat down on the edge of that rusted bed frame, the springs groaning under my weight. I looked at her, really looked at her. The narrative said she died as a toddler. The narrative was a lie. She survived the fire Arthur started, survived 30 years in Miss Hell, just to stop me from making a mistake. She didn't want revenge. She wanted me to destroy the legacy from the inside. It was 4:45 p.m. The sun was dipping below the tree line, casting long, dark shadows across the plywood floor. The smell of kerosene and wet earth was suffocating, but for the first time, I knew exactly who I was. I wasn't Zora Okonkwo, the replacement heir. I was the weapon they forged, and I was about to turn it back on them. The drive back to McLean from West Virginia was silent. I didn't turn on the radio. I just watched the mile markers pass. When I walked through the front door at 4:45 a.m., the air in the foyer was sterile. It smelled like lemon polish and old money. There was no smell of cedar, no wet earth, just the rotting opulence of a house that sits on a foundation of bones. I went straight to the study. The grandfather clock was ticking. Tick, tick. It sounded like a bomb counting down. I walked to the wall safe. My hands were steady. I didn't even feel the cold air anymore. I opened the heavy steel door and I looked at the stack of files. The birth certificate. The one that says Zora Okonkwo. A name that legally belongs to a woman I left in a cabin in the woods. I slid it back into the manila folder. Next to it was the payment receipt, $50,000. Just a receipt for a human life. I put that back too. I even put the Polaroid back. The one of the toddler with the port wine stain. I closed the safe. I spun the dial. Click, click, click. The lock engaged. The evidence was hidden again. But now I knew where the bodies were buried. And I looked up. Above the mahogany fireplace hangs the portrait. My father, Arthur. He's painted in that navy suit, looking like a statesman. His eyes are that ice blue. The same eyes I stared into for 4 hours in a wheelchair. I walked over to the desk and picked up the brass letter opener. It was heavy, cold. I ran my thumb over the tip. Sharp. I thought about the fire. I thought about him stepping over his burning daughter to save a briefcase full of blackmail files. I remembered a dinner party when I was 12. I had spilled wine on the carpet. I was terrified. Arthur just looked at me and said, "Zora, accidents are just mistakes with bad timing. Cover it up before the guests see." Well, Father, I found your stain, and it's not coming out. Why didn't I call the police? Why didn't they dial 911 the second they hit the Fairfax County line? Because prison is a vacation for people like them. They have connections, they have lawyers. They turn it into a tragedy about a misunderstanding and a confused daughter. No, that doesn't align with the facts. I am a litigator. I know how to destroy a legacy without ever laying a hand on it. I'm going to take the Cayman Islands records. I'm going to take the testimony from Clara Higgins. I'm going to take the DNA evidence. And I am going to dismantle the Oakenquoll name piece by piece in the court of public opinion. I'm going to go upstairs. I'm going to wash my face. I'm going to put on my pearls. And tonight at dinner, I am going to sit across from them. And I am going to smile. I'm going to ask Mother about her garden. I'm going to ask Father about the Senate race. And while they talk, I'm going to be writing the closing argument that sends them both to hell. They built a lie to live in, so I'm going to live in it until I own the deed, and then I'm burning it to the ground.